Okay, I'm here with Springfield's other state senator, Jake Oliveira, who also represents communities like Ludlow, Wilbraham, Hamden, et cetera, et cetera. Jake, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here, Mike. You're actually in my district in Springfield right now. So the Elks Club on Tiffany Street is my 1/8 of the city, part of my district.
Okay, so I'll ask you a question I asked Adam, and that is about the leftover legislation from the end of the session. I know Governor Healy has talked about trying to get the legislature back in before the next formal session begins, especially for the economic development bill. Now, what do you think about that? Do you think that that is warranted? And what do you think about the economic development bill as it stands now?
Well, there are some great wins for Western Massachusetts in the economic development bill, and I stand ready to go back into session at any point to get that over the finish line and get it to Governor Healy's desk. But that's just one piece of legislation that's pending before the legislature. I have several other bills that I really want to get over the finish line before January 1st when the new legislative session starts, including a long-term health care bill that really holds accountable the bad actors that are in our nursing and assisted living facility management systems here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Was that inspired in part by the situation in South Hadley?
That was absolutely. I spoke on the Senate floor about the situation in South Hadley as Senator Pat Jalen, my dear colleague from Somerville, was presenting the bill. That is in conference right now, and hopefully that can get over the finish line. I think the votes were unanimous in both houses of the legislature, so that could be even something we could get done in an informal session. I think it's important to point out that even though the legislature has adjourned for formal sessions, unless we go back in, there are several bills that can make it over the finish line. We haven't stopped working. Informal sessions have a lot of bills that get signed into law by the governor once they're passed during an informal session. So a long-term health care bill, a hospital bill holding our hospital, particularly our for-profit hospitals, accountable, is on the table as well. A prescription drug bill to basically force our prescription drug companies and insurance companies to provide life-saving drugs, multi-generation drugs for things like diabetes, heart disease, and other life-altering illnesses. Provide them for $25 per month, caps them for name-brand drugs and $0 for generic drugs. That would be a game changer for the residents of the Commonwealth. And we also have a Municipal Empowerment Act. As chair of the Municipalities Committee in the legislature, we heard testimony on giving more flexibility to our 351 cities and towns for things like procurement, for things like debt servicing, that can give them a lot more flexibility to manage their communities in a much more efficient manner. And I'm hopeful that we can get some of these bills over the finish line before the next legislative session begins.
Do you think coming back early is actually going to happen? Because I know that the governor has been talking about it. I don't know what the viewpoint is of the Senate president, for instance.
Well, the Senate president and the speaker have both signaled that they're willing to come back into session if we reach agreement. And so, especially with the economic development bill, since it is bonded funding, you need to have a roll call vote in the legislature to get it over the finish line. But I think it's important to point out what is actually in that bill that helps Western Massachusetts, including investment in food sciences for the University of Massachusetts, close to $30 million that will go for research and development that will help institutions up and down the valley, including here in the city of Springfield, but also in places like some of our small community farms. I have in my district in Belchertown, Cold Springs Orchard, which is actually the University of Massachusetts agricultural testing facility, which could be a huge boom for them and farmers in the area. That's in the economic development bill. There's another carve out for Western Massachusetts in the Pioneer Valley for looking at things like quantum physics and how we transport information and data technology. And we've worked solidly as a Western Mass delegation to make sure that is in the final product of the bill. And obviously there's so many local projects for our cities and towns that are essential to all of us. That economic development bill needs to get over the finish line before we enter the next legislative session.
Okay, I gotta ask you another question I asked Adam. Treat you guys equally. As you're campaigning for your re-election, and it should be noticed that you, at this point, are running unopposed. What are people saying to you as their concerns? What are your constituents listing as things that are worrying them or bothering them?
Well, a lot of it has to do with some of the national politics that we're seeing right now, and a lot of fear that a Trump administration could have on the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and on Western Massachusetts in general. So there's a lot of fear with the presidential election coming up that we could take a step backwards, and we don't want to do that. The other thing that people are uniquely worried about is the housing crunch. We were happy to pass a nearly $5 billion housing bond bill that will invest in our cities and towns, will invest in affordable housing, will allow for greater development of properties, and allow flexibility for different modes of living. ADUs are something that was included in the bill, something that I worked on, that I filed as a standalone bill, was actually included in the final legislation that was signed into law by Governor Healy. But housing continues to be a major concern for residents in Western Massachusetts, and also fear. Rising electricity rates is another thing that I'm facing. My heat in my own home and my air conditioning is all based on electric rates. And when you see them spiking right now, we need to empower the Department of Public Utilities to hold our electric companies accountable to ensure that there isn't gouging of residents that rely on electricity to heat their homes and to actually just live in them. So those are some of the issues that we're hearing from folks, but also making sure that we uplift people. People, have a sense of optimism, which, I haven't seen in quite a while. People are optimistic about the future, and they want to make sure that their government is responsive to them. And when you have a responsive government, when you have a responsive legislative delegation like we have in Western Massachusetts, I know that the future is bright for all of us.
Excellent. As always, a pleasure to talk to you, Senator.
Yeah, Mike,
thanks
anytime.
very much.
Take care.